My name's Robert Hill. I'm a poet. I go under the nom de plume of Jack Hughes. And what do? I mess around with words and poetry, short stories, flash fiction, and hopefully some funny jokes. The first poem I ever wrote actually was at primary school, and it was a poem called Red Blood, White Death, and it was about sharks, and I got a gold star for it. And then really what happened then is I put it all to one side, forgot all about it for years, and then I had a poem that just came to me, and I was really proud of, really pleased with, and I wanted an outlet for it, and I googled Poetry Bournemouth and Freeway Poetry came up, so I went along that night. It was June of 2010. Got up, was very nervous, and just shouted this poem down the microphone and got a very good reception. I thought, yeah, maybe I can do this. Are we who work in majority education soon to be declared the new enemy within? Because we want the same pension we were promised when we started teaching? Will those leaders of the nation from privileged backgrounds and private education, those who went to Westminster and Eton, declare us as public enemy number one? That's a tough one, because I didn't really start studying poets until I actually started teaching English literature, which sounds a very strange thing to say. I was aware of poetry and I enjoyed poetry, but I would say song lyrics were a big influence. David Bowie, people like that. David Byrne, Talking Heads. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, people like that. They were the biggest influences on me initially. Actual poets, I think, have become an influence afterwards. I think Simon Armitage, of the, if you like, the sort of contemporary poets. But it's hard really, it's the odd poem that comes up rather than a poet that really influences me. I would imagine that in Shakespeare's day, when he was writing his sonnets, people were asking him the same question: how does this compare to the poetry of Homer? You know, you know, what you got to kind of think is that at the time of people writing, it's contemporary, and it's interesting. For example, Shelley rather, in his poem Ozymandias, he talks about a broken statue of a great king, and he's taken the sonnet form and he's deliberately broken the rules of the sonnet form, and it's interesting because when you kind of spot what he's done there, you realise what he's done is he's represented that broken statue of a great king by breaking this great poetic form and deliberately smashing it to pieces, but in a quite subtle way. And I don't think that you can compare eras, because you know, wherever any boundaries anybody's trying to push now, back then, whenever then is, people were pushing boundaries then as well. Oh, absolutely. The more I teach, the more I discover. And I say to my students, you know, there's got to come a time where you switch from being passive learners to actively getting involved, so that you can teach what you've just studied. Not necessarily to go off and become teachers, but if they can get up and I get them to do it. I ask them to look at a poem and analyse it and explain how they think what it means and their interpretation. It's a lot easier to write poems when you understand how poetry works. It doesn't mean that there are hard and fast rules, but if you look at the hard and fast rules that do exist, like the form of a sonnet and the different types of sonnet, then, as I said about Shelley earlier, you can play around with that. Yeah, I've been asked that quite a lot, and I think there's several reasons. One, I think hip-hop is a massive part of it. I think the idea of just getting up and speaking what you're thinking is a big part of it. And also, you know, you've got a generation that have grown up, you know, hearing that kind of music, and it's not that big a deal to take the leap that you can then write your own lyrics down. That's a big part of it. I think the other thing as well is, as we go into this kind of electronic age where things are said and then they're gone again, you know, with Twitter and Facebook and everything, and text messages and everything else, there's a kind of maybe a subconscious hankering to write things that are going to be permanent or have some kind of permanence, and I think that might be part of it. The other thing as well is people over the last 20 years, I think, have been given more license to voice their opinions and be heard, and poetry is a great way of being heard and not just having a voice that's amongst all the rest of the noise. Poetry is a great way of standing out when you've got something to say. So you're not, you know, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the mob, but if you can say something, if you can articulate it in a different way, then things do stand out.